So I'm up here on the Mount of Olives, the very top of the Vineyard, overlooking all the area of the resort. This is where it all began. It began here as a place where I would come at night or in the morning. It's a place of contemplation and imagining the different elements that will go on the property. So in the next few minutes, you're going to see different statues, different pieces of artwork and objects, and elements that I call sacred grounds, but ultimately they are part of the different instruments that are playing in this symphony called Allegretto. During my travels in small villages and towns, I would always notice an abbey. And it was sort of like the centering spot of the town. As Allegretto began to form on this 20 acres of land, it was always important for me one day to build an abbey. And so the abbey found its way to where it sits here in the garden, looking up to the very top of the Mount of Olives. Recently, early one morning at sunrise, and the property was just under a year old, I wanted to give a special recognition of thanks, sort of a baptism, or we might call it an initiation. We gathered with a small group of people, instruments, there was some singing, there was chanting, there was prayers. And the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. We used ancient instruments to say thank you to the land and each of the spaces here at Allegretto. So this place, as in all old villages or towns, there's an abbey. There's a place of worship. There's a place where people come together. Of course, there's also the bell tower. The bell tower we have just above the abbey. So, the story for the bell. Actually, there's two bells. But as I was inspired in the old villages in Europe, I would hear the bells ring in an abbey or a church, and it just brings back that sense of old history. We had originally planned clocks to go on the tower, and the idea just didn't strike me in this modern busy day world that we're going to be reminded of time again. So I spent a long time in hunting for an old bell, and a bell that's big enough to have a big sound, and yet small enough to fit in the tower. So one bell ended up to be two bells because you couldn't hear this bell on the far side of the property. So it ended up to be sort of this dance. One rings, another rings. So now, wherever you are on the property, when the bells are ringing, you can hear them. And they end up sort of balancing each other out. It's kind of like a lot of the other elements here at Allegretto. So this is a big slice of a giant sequoia that's over 2,000 years old from the forest here in California. This particular piece was about 150 feet in the air, so the base of this tree was probably 30-35 feet wide. This piece is awe-striking when people see it. Some people begin to tear, many people just go silent and rub the tree. It's a special element within the whole sphere of history, and it shows us how small we are in our slice of time. So I just so happen to have some giant sequoia trees on my property where I live here in Paso. And I snipped the end of the new growth, and we matched the Venetian plaster to the color you see there on the wall. And then the tree began to say, yes, I'm at home. In the grandeur of the whole scheme, this tree lived through a big part of history. So this is the Virgin of Guadalupe. She was carved in Guanajuato, Mexico, and given to me as a gift from a good friend of mine, Armando. And he had the influence to be able to take her from Guanajuato to be blessed by the bishop at the Basilica of the Virgin of Guadalupe in Mexico City. And then she came here to Allegretto. She's happy to be here, and she brings joy. And each day, someone may just take a flower and put it in her hands. So here, an ancient wellhead. I found it in Vicenza, Italy, a place where water was drawn from for many hundreds of years, now placed in the garden here. What a wonderful place for maybe someone to have a wedding in amongst an ancient ring with an obelisk behind. The ancient obelisk, used throughout history, but its roots coming from Egypt. And where it sits, it's in an ideal location that lines up with the feminine tunnel and the feminine wellhead. So once again, we have the yin and the yang playing out, the masculine and the feminine playing out throughout the architecture and the features within the property. Wow, the walking of the labyrinth. What a wonderful experience to engage in this movement and somehow walking this ancient template restructures, refigures things within us, whether you feel it or not. There's just an activation of rebirth in some ways. Here we are on the top of the Mount of Olives here at Allegretto. It's a beautiful place to be in the morning. As the sun rises, the vines are all blooming again, and the different varietals of wine. We have the Tannat, the Cabernet, Vineyard, and Vermentino. We have the bell tower over there. It's just wonderful. I'm standing here in this gazebo made from Italian travertine, in amongst all the conifer trees and the olive trees. This is one of the many places in the garden area where people can come to gather and have an event or a wedding, or just to simply be quiet and reflect. This here is a Shiva Lingam stone. It's found in these rivers in India where it's naturally rolled over the course of hundreds and hundreds of years to take on this shape. When they take them out of the rivers, they're placed in their temples. Here at Allegretto, it stands as a pillar. It sits in the very center of these 4 beautiful sacred gardens. And here we are in another one of the olive gardens, and we're getting close to harvest. We're not quite there yet, but it's neat because the shape of the trees is changing and the branches are hanging lower because the fruit's on there. It's getting heavier and heavier. It's really great since we have 9 different varietals of olives here on the property. It's exciting. Another harvest. We go from grapes to olives. I could just sit here more often. So this is basically an Adirondack chair. It's made from old wine barrels. You know, we've seen these around all the time. I had it calibrated to accept the human body when one sits here. So what I did is I adjust each of the parts and pieces, the pitch of everything, because we sort of take the chair apart. We're talking about the height of the front legs, the height of the back legs. Every part has to be in total concert, in the total symphony. And then the body is just in this peaceful spot, and it makes it a real joy to sit. So in the end, you've got to come try it out because this is really nice. And it's nice to hear the guests say that. They get in the chairs and they say, ooh, this is really nice. So all of these elements that we walked around today, whether it be an architectural piece or sculptural piece or a tree, I believe everything has its particular sacred spot to be where it feels most in harmony and balance. All of that speaks to the whole of what happens here at Allegretto. It's an instrument being tuned. And there's always adjustments that go on, giving harmony to balance in architecture, and in the end, as people walk through it, they're feeling the architecture of balance. It becomes a sacred place.